Hey, Stacey David here, and this is the Tales of a Gearhead podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Cornwell Tools, the choice of professionals since 1919. That's right, over 100 years building tools and still going strong. If you need tools, check them out. You won't be disappointed. All right, let's get rolling. Today we're going to talk about one of the most exciting things that you can possibly do as a car person. And it can also be one of the most frustrating things if you don't do it right. And that is going out and finding a vehicle and bringing it home. And I'm talking about pulling something out of a field. There is a part of a discovery there. It's part recovery. You know, it's an adventure. It can really be a fun thing if you handle it right. If you don't, it can turn into one of the worst experiences you will ever have. I get a lot of questions about this kind of stuff. It's like, how do you strap a vehicle down and how do you go get something? How do you recover something from a field? How do you do that kind of thing? So this answer is kind of wrapped around a lot of those questions. So here's some of the things that you need to do when you're going to go pick up a vehicle. Now, this is different than something that you bought that's in a garage or something that is on the side of the road, a running vehicle. What we're dealing with here now is that vehicle that has been sitting out in a field, or it's out in the trees, and it's out in the wild a little bit, away from the house, out in the elements. So the first thing that you need to decide is how you're going to get to it. So you need to go out and look at the vehicle and go, okay, do I need a 4x4 truck? Am I going to walk down there? Do we need to use a tractor? How am I going to get down to the vehicle? Are we going to have to pull it up to get it on a trailer? Can I get my trailer right down there to it? What is the location that you're going to have to deal with? And that has to be the first thing that you plan so you can even get to it. Okay, so then once you get to there, the second thing is, how are you going to pull it out? Okay, so you can get to it, but now how are you going to pull it out? And usually you have to winch these things. So you need to make sure that you have a trailer with a winch or a truck with a winch or some way to pull the vehicle out. And don't forget, if you're using a winch, you got to have a recovery kit with it. A lot of guys just go out there with their winch and they're like, well, how do I hook it to the car? And then they hook it to the bumper or something like that, and they tear the car up because they didn't take the proper recovery equipment. I carry a complete recovery, a winch recovery kit. And then I throw in extra straps, axle straps, those kind of things, because you never know where you're going to have to tie onto these vehicles to pull them out. And so make sure you have a recovery thing with a snatch block, everything, if you're going to be doing any kind of winching. All right, the next thing you have to deal with is flat tires. And you can pretty much figure that at least one of those tires are going to be flat. And that's something that you have to take into consideration. How is it going to roll? In other words, are you going to change the tires? I don't recommend that. Are you going to put air in the tires, try to air them up? That means you have to carry a compressor or an air tank to have air out there. You have to be able to get this thing up where it will roll, if at all possible. If not, if you go out there and the tires are just hanging off and there's huge gaps in them, then you need to take that into consideration, that you're going to have to roll this thing up on rims. And how are you going to do that? Are the brakes locked up? Are you just going to force it? Because the winch will pull it up on there. But what are you going to destroy if you don't put rollers underneath there? And that brings up another thing. If you need rollers, make sure you bring it, like car dollies or something, to be able to roll the vehicle. That jumps right into the next part, and that is jacking it up. Because if you're going to change the tires, you're going to put air in the tires, if you're going to put it on any kind of rollers, well, you got to be able to get the vehicle up in the air a little bit, which means you have to jack it up. And this is probably the biggest thing that people forget to bring. They have all their winches and everything, and the vehicle's down there buried to the axles, and they're like, how do I get it up off the ground? And for me, I usually carry just a lightweight aluminum floor jack. Something that you can carry around, not those big heavy suckers. Something you can roll underneath there, get it under an axle, get it under a control arm, or a rocker or something like that, and be able to jack the vehicle up and get some clearance under those tires. That's huge. And if you're going to be using a jack like that, make sure you throw in a jack stand and some wood blocks and the normal things that you would use, when you're jacking things up. As you can see, this list is starting to grow of things that you might want to carry with you. Oh, and that's another thing. If you're just going to change the tires, obviously you'll need to carry a spare with the right bolt pattern. That brings up a whole new thing. If you're going to take a tire off, then you need the tools to be able to knock the lug nuts loose. And I always carry an electric impact wrench to do that. I don't mess around with any of this manual stuff because, lug nuts are rusted on, man. Sometimes they're going to fight you all the way. So make sure you carry the tools if you're going to be taking a tire off and trying to repair it out there in the field. The next thing are just the natural things like bushes and trees and shrubs. Obviously, if there's a tree growing up through the engine compartment, you're going to have to cut that before you can get it up on the trailer. Now, everybody, you laugh about that. I've actually had to do that before. I had to cut a tree out of the front of a Jeep to pull it out of a lean-to. But what you will run into is bushes and stuff that are up around there. So it wouldn't hurt to have some gloves and, a little handsaw or something where you can clear some brush. Also, another very important thing is some sort of ground cover that you can lay on, because you don't want to be laying down in the poison ivy and the ant hills and all the other stuff that's out there. You don't even know what's on the ground. But you will find out you lay down in it. Any kind of a ground cover, man, it can be a piece of cardboard or a garbage bag, that you split and just lay on the plastic. Just something to keep you off of the ground, especially if you're crawling under a vehicle. So that takes care of, kind of the natural stuff. Then you need some sort of an animal kit. And this is like a gun with snake shot in it, a snake bite kit. I usually carry something like that. If you're around where there might be copperheads or any kind of a poisonous snake. And just, a first aid kit for if you get bitten by a possum or something. Because these things are out there. And these are in these vehicles. And no one really ever talks about this. But they will sit up in those vehicles. And, usually your mice and your rodents will run off. But things like possums and skunks and some of those other animals, they'll just kind of sit back. Remember, they think they're away from you. If they're in the trunk and you're working on the front of the car, they think there's plenty of distance there. And, of course, snakes are the worst. They'll just hide under seats and in trunks just until you literally get into their area. It's really important that you're planning for that. I know that there was one time on the show we were out in a junkyard, and you guys may have seen this. I was pulling parts off of a 56 Buick. I took the whole front clip off, with a Sawzall. I was cutting the frame rails and the whole thing. And there was a snake living back in the trunk, and he was happy because we didn't know this at the time. And then the car went over, and we pulled the engine and transmission out with a big forklift. So the car was forklifted over there. And it wasn't until we opened the trunk that snake decided he was going to get out of that car. There was no way in the world I thought a snake would still be in that car after what we had done to it. But there he was. Fortunately, it wasn't poisonous, but he was there. And the reason this is such a big deal is you don't want to drag something home to your garage with an animal in it. Because keep in mind, they're in the car in the first place because it's a great house. I mean, think about it. You're an animal out there and you're looking for a hole in the ground or something to live under. And here's this car with these nice seats with foam that you can chew on and electrical wiring you can eat and all this stuff. So the rodents go up in there, and then the snakes are right behind them going, hey, I'm going to eat those rodents. So they're all in there. It makes a great house for them. And so when you take that thing home and you put it into your garage and they start to feel the heat from that hot water heater, well, now they're really arrived. And it is not uncommon for guys to find snakes wrapped around their hot water heaters and stuff that have come in with their car that they pulled out of a field. So be careful with that stuff. Let it sit outside for a while. Go through it before you start putting it inside where your family might be coming in and going, hey, what's that under the seat? You know, I talked to a guy the other day, and it wasn't too long before we started talking tools. That always comes up. And he said the stuff on the trucks are just too darn expensive, man. It's just for rich people. And I laughed and I asked him how valuable his time was. And he said he didn't understand the question. And I explained that the more time he spends messing around with cheap, crappy tools, the more time you waste getting nothing done. And time is a commodity we all have in limited supply. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, maybe I'll look into some of those tools on a truck. He won't be disappointed, neither will you. Check him out. All right, we talked about a first aid kit. Obviously, that is for more than just snake bite kits. It's what I call the 3 C's. It's for cuts. We all know what those are. And it's for crush injuries. And that is for when you pinch a finger or you get something up underneath something, which happens all the time when you're out there doing that kind of thing. That's the main kind of injuries. You're going to get cuts or you're going to crush something. You're going to catch your leg underneath something or do something like that. And the third C is crud. Crud in your eyes, crud that falls up, something that gets in your face. So you have to be ready for those kind of things. Those are the main issues you're going to deal with out there rescuing a car. And then finally, make sure that you're planning how to strap the vehicle down to the trailer. People get out, they get excited, and they throw it on the trailer, and they only have a couple of straps. Or, here's another big one. A lot of times you'll buy a vehicle or pick something up, and the owner will be like, hey, man, I'll throw in that rear end or that hood. Well, you ever tried to strap a hood down? If you don't have the proper strapping, so guys slide it under the car and do that kind of thing. And that hood decides to head down, decides to take a little vacation halfway down the interstate. So make sure that you have the straps and the ability to strap things down when you get out there and as you're looking at it. And if they throw something in and you can't strap it down, man, don't take it. Come back and get it on another trip. This is coming from years of experience of having things go out the back of the truck and doing crazy stuff. I was out one time and I bought a transmission off a guy. I had gone out looking at these carburetors. This guy had a whole bunch of old Stromberg carburetors, so I bought a bunch of those. And there sits a top loader 4-speed, on the ground. And I'm like, what is that? So he sells it to me for like $50. I mean, this was a really nice transmission. It went right in one of my cars. So I'm like, I'll take it. And I throw it in the back, and I was driving a 32 Ford pickup at the time, and a really nice street rod. And I didn't have any way to strap that transmission down in the back of the truck. And I had this nice oak bed. And, those old trucks, they only had single-wall beds. So it's just a single wall of steel. I didn't think anything about it. I think I took my shoes off or something and packed my shoes around it. That's going to help. Okay, so I'm driving down the road, and pretty soon I kind of forget what's in the back there, and I get into a situation where I got to get down on the brakes a little bit. So I get down on the brakes, and I hear the transmission. Here it comes. Ka-tunk, 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 ka-tunk. Coming forward, rolling forward in the bed of my truck, and boom! Into the side of my bed. Big old dent. Scarred the floor all up. And matter of fact, the transmission had kind of rotated a bit, so the input shaft hit the wall and put a big circular dent in the sidewall of the pickup. And I'm like, what the heck? And it was all my fault. I mean, and that's the thing. Usually, somebody said that stupidity is always self-induced. You're not born stupid. You just do stupid stuff. And there's a lot of truth to that. So make sure you're not doing stupid stuff. I had driven by all kinds of quick stops and places. I could have gotten some sort of a strap to strap that thing down properly, but I didn't. And it cost me. So make sure that you're not doing that. Just be prepared for weirdness. Because a lot of times you'll pick up a vehicle and the door won't shut. Or a piece of trim will want to come off, or the hood won't latch and the hood will come up. So you need to have extra straps to be able to strap that stuff down properly. It's not just strapping the vehicle to the trailer. It's strapping it to where you're not going to lose parts on the way home. Keep that in mind and have some fun out there, man. Make it an adventure. Just go prepared. All right, this question comes from Joe, and Joe has a very common problem here. He says he wants to know how to get windshield marks out of the windshield of his truck. And Joe, I assume that you're talking about the windshield wiper marks, which happen when your windshield wipers get old and worn and people just keep using them, and eventually they will scratch your windshield. Joe, I got some good news and maybe some bad news. It is possible to get those marks out of your windshield, provided, and here's the bad news, they're not too deep. Unless you've let it go too long and you've dug deep into the glass, you're not going to get that out. If it's just scratches on the surface, that can be buffed out. Now, there's a kit that you can buy. It's just a glass buffing kit. I think 3M makes one. You can usually find them at your local auto parts store. It's just a little bit of fine grit that you put, in a buffing wheel, and you buff the windshield just like you would a paint job. But there's a special grit that they use that I recommend you picking up. Don't just pour a bunch of polish on your windshield and go after it, although that would help. No, this stuff is actually designed for glass. Here's a good rule of thumb. If you go to the scratches on your windshield, run your fingernail across them. If it catches your fingernail, substantially, you'll feel it kind of grabbing at your fingernail. Those are okay. But if it's a scratch that kind of catches your finger, that's deep. Chances are really good you're not going to get that out completely. But if it's just you just feel the abrasion of it, that's good. And then just go out there and buff it out, and that'll come right out of there. Even if your scratches are too deep and you can't remove the scratch completely, buffing it out will help tremendously to where you'll just have a single scratch there. And you should be good to go. And of course, if the scratches are too deep, you just need to replace the windshield. But yeah, go ahead, get yourself a kit, and get out there, and take you just 20 minutes to get that cleaned up. All right, I got a question here from Gabe. He's on the subject of converting a carburetor to fuel injection, and he just has a quick question. He says, can I just connect a fuel line from the tank to the pump, and then from the pump to the throttle body, and just bolt it on and run that way? Well, Gabe, no, you can't. You can't do it just like that. Don't go just from the fuel tank to the pump. You have got to put a filter there first, because you've got to keep any trash out of that fuel pump because you'll lock it up. Second of all, the only other thing with this is that most fuel injection, even your throttle body, needs a return line. Now, Holley's got that new Sniper, and they've got these new returns that are in the tank, which means you have to go in the tank, and the pump and the return and everything is in the tank, so you don't have to run a return line. So that's really slick, but it does mean you have to get in the tank and change that over. But if you don't have that, if you're not running that, you can plan on that you're going to have to run some sort of fuel return line. Other than that, yeah, it's not that hard. Everything else looks like you got it right. So good luck to you on it, man. All right, that wraps it up for us today. Make sure that you check out the Gears TV website. We got all kinds of cool stuff there. We got a couple new die casts coming out. Got some books coming out. We have all kinds of things going on. But the most important thing is get out there and turn some wrenches yourself. Get a project. If you don't have one, start working on it. And if you don't have tools, check out Cornwell. They can help you out there.